long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, well, not really that long ago, but it was a long time ago, at least in my life. I was into a lot of outdoor activities when I was in college. Hiking, kayaking, and yes, I even learned to whitewater kayak. We practiced in a pool, practiced our roles. I even know how to whitewater canoe. I went caving, or some people like to call it spelunking. And I always said I would try anything once. I knew a lot of people who did a lot of different things. So one afternoon, I found myself with a few friends standing in the sunshine facing a rock wall. I was tied in and I was helmeted up, and it was my first attempt at rock climbing. Now, I knew people who ice climbed in the winter. They have ice axes and crampons. There were people who loved technical climbs, hammering in their pitons and rappelling great heights. I just had to face a 30-foot wall. And so as I stood there, I realized that my heart was beating really fast, my palms were sweaty, and my mouth was dry. I think you probably know the feeling. But as I said, I was up for trying anything once, so I yelled, "Climb on!" and the person up at the top of the cliff said, "Climb away!" and I started out. Well, you know what? Nerves do terrible things to you. They make your movements stiff, they make your head a little light, and neither of which is really good when you're trying to scramble up a wall. I fell. But I only fell a little bit because my belayer caught me. I could trust the rope that I was tied onto. And after I reoriented myself and got settled back on that wall, from that moment on, my breathing was easier. I found myself more relaxed, probably than I was even before I got there. I was more flexible, and my hands and my mind and my heart were all working together, and I made it to the top. And rock climbing became one of my favorite things to do when I was in college. I actually still like that challenge of climbing up things. But it became one of my favorite things because I learned to trust the rope. Well, in these times, if we ever need someone to walk beside us, it's now, or to use that climbing metaphor. It's time to learn to trust the rope. Now, in the last few weeks in Scripture, we've been hearing a lot about the disciples' experiences, and we've learned we've got a lot in common with them. We know that there's uncertainty in how things look now and how things will be in the future. We wonder at whether we'll ever feel the solid sense of community together again in a sanctuary or in gatherings or even around a dinner table. We know the stress of some of us that aren't working, or for some who aren't getting paid or not seeing family, and that's especially hard for grandparents who don't get to see their grandchildren. We have the anxiety of just cracking open our door and venturing forth, not knowing what we'll encounter. It was the same for the disciples. They couldn't go out, they feared going out, and I think that they had that same feeling that we have. Our mouths get dry, our heads get a little light, our hearts are beating too fast, and if we keep going over and over in our head all these things that are stressing us out, we'll fall into hopelessness. And this is where, in our lesson today, that firm but gentle voice of Jesus steps in, interrupts us, makes us pause, and offers us a lifeline that is for always. He says, "I will ask the Father, and He will give you another advocate to be with you forever. I will not leave you orphaned." I have to say, that's a relief. It's a relief to read that again, to hear that again. That we won't be alone, that we aren't alone. And I'm sure it was a relief to the disciples. Oh, great, But then once they started to think about it, I think think they might have wondered exactly what Jesus meant. What did he mean by this advocate? Who is this? Or in the original language, the advocate was the parakletos, the paraclete, as we say it. Is the paraclete another Jesus? And how could it be with us forever? Well, it's helpful for us to know that the paraclete, not parakeet, as sometimes it gets confused, it's not a bird, but it's an advocate. It's a term for someone who's called to one side as a source of help. And so Jesus gives us the Spirit. It's simple, really. The Spirit accompanies us. Kind of like Kay was saying, we may not see it, but we can feel it. And it comes to each one of us in different ways. So the Spirit accompanies us. The Spirit is our companion. This Spirit is a lifeline from above that keeps us from falling and from falling into hopelessness. Now, the advocate is who Jesus has already been for his disciples. Think about this. Jesus has always been the advocate, the companion, along the journey with the disciples. He's been guiding them and teaching them. He's been reminding and abiding with them. He's been witnessing to them, interceding for them, comforting them. So what the disciples have known in Jesus and fear losing in his absence, now they are promised they will always know this presence, this advocate, the Spirit. Now, in this time where we won't have a lot of certainty for a while, the promise of the Spirit's presence to us is vital. Jesus knows that what lies ahead we can't do on our own. And the Spirit that Jesus gives us, it's there for us to hold on to. And it's there to hold on to us too. To help us live this day in trust. Just this one day. In trust and in hope. Now that Spirit is walking beside us. It's helping us to exist, to persevere one day at a time. Even when everything else seems hopeless around us, and sometimes within us. Now, for some of us, the idea of the Holy Spirit is a little ephemeral. We don't really have too much trouble picturing Jesus. We know he was the God come to us in human form. But the Spirit is a little bit more abstract, which is why illustrations like the wind blowing really helps us to understand. And if you think about it this way, Jesus followed up his promise of giving the Spirit by saying, I will not leave you orphaned. I'm coming to you. Because I live, you live. So they knew that he died and came to life again. That life rather than death was the final word. And that is what's crucial to remember. The Spirit is life that has the final word and is always with us. So the Spirit is none other than the Spirit who came upon Jesus at Galilee. It's the same Spirit through which God made all of creation. We live and we breathe the Spirit, but sometimes we forget. And we try to rely on ourselves. We find crutches to help us get along, whatever those might be. But it's the Spirit, this creating, abiding Spirit of God that's with us all the time. Now you may have wondered why I included the visit of Paul to Athens in our lesson today, but hopefully I'll be able to explain why I included that, even though it was lectionary and it seems a little off. But it's helpful to know that Paul went to Athens because he wanted to bring the message of Christ, because there were pagans that were still living in Athens and they were still worshiping and clinging to these various gods for support. And so when he was out in the marketplace, he came across a statue that was dedicated to an unknown god. Now, reading between the lines, it's the cover all the bases in case we left some deity out of our worship kind of statue. That's really what this was. But Paul saw it as an opportunity to talk to the Athenians, to help them understand that what they had unknown to them was actually the Creator God who couldn't be captured by temples made with hands or molds poured with silver or gold. That it's the God of all people. It's not a distant God, but a divine being present to us all. And that is the Spirit. It comes and is present to all of us. Paul told them, and we could hear it as well, that the Creator God is the one in whom we live and have our being, our heartbeat, our breath, our what we see, what we hear. That is God with us. So Paul spoke back then, but I think time is irrelevant. The Spirit abides in us, and in it we live and move and have our being. It's our lifeline. And when we get to understand this and embrace it, we can learn to trust the Spirit. We can learn to trust the rope. Richard Attenborough once said, "There's a light in this world, a healing spirit more powerful than any darkness we may encounter. We sometimes lose sight of this force when there's suffering and there's too much pain. But then there's a moment when that spirit emerges through the lives of ordinary people. Ordinary people who hear a call and answer in extraordinary ways." So maybe that's something we should think about. How are we answering the call of the Spirit in us? Maybe some of us are finding creative ways to reach out to one another, to spend our days, to cope with the stress of and the emotional ups and downs of wondering. One moment we hear from the governor who tells us we'll be able to go back and do sorts of things, and then the next we find out, no, it's not good. I think I heard that one day they opened restaurants in one city, and then the next day they were closed because they realized they just can't make things safe enough for people. So it's hard not to get our expectations up because they'll be dashed. So we have to be realistic, which is hard. So maybe we're feeling helpless. And if we are feeling helpless, it's good to acknowledge that. We're all feeling that sort of thing. I think we need to have things that we look forward to that help us connect. The internet is one way, phone calls and that sort of thing are great ways to connect. But I also find that our online prayer meetings on Sundays at 11 are great because we get to see one another's faces and hear each other's voices. It's a good connection. And I have to say, it's important to me because I'm getting pretty sick of my own company. So we need to get out into our yards or walk down the neighborhood to watch for, as Hildegard of Bingen called it, the greening of the spirit, which has more to do with life abundant than it does with the eco-green movement. So watch for the greening of the spirit. To wonder about that one dark tree we see that doesn't have any leaves and it appears to be dead. But only when we get closer, we realize it's just a late bloomer, and it's going to leaf out eventually. It's signs like that are all around us that hope still abounds. Like that tree, maybe that's how it is for all of us as we wait for the coming of Jesus, in our present sense of feeling like orphans or wondering how we are going to be able to feel community. Because that lone tree, or what I actually had a plant that someone gave me a couple of years ago that I thought was dead. I was getting ready to throw it out and I didn't, and I just left it on my counter. And about a month ago it started shooting up green leaves. And now one of the things is this tall. So you just never know. We don't know where life is going to come from. But we know that we have the promise of life. That the promise is that there are forces of life at work right now. Maybe we're just not close enough to see it just yet. But today I invite you to trust the rope, to trust in the Spirit, and know that it's the same Spirit promised the disciples in their darkest hours, and it's our promise